There are people dying on the inside today, with a smile on their face. Not from lack of food or opportunity, but from an excess of pleasure. And no one talks about this. Have you noticed? The more the world tries to make you happy, the more miserably empty you feel. You have everything that generates pleasure in seconds. Food, sex, distraction, entertainment, validation, applause, even a little love if you want it. And yet, something is missing. It's like trying to fill a hole with smoke. The problem is simple, but cruel. Pleasure has become the center of modern life, and pleasure has no center. It always escapes, always demands more. It always leaves you feeling dumber, more lacking, more desperate. And the most indigestible truth of all is this: you do not want pleasure. You just want to numb yourself. You want to stop thinking, stop feeling, stop remembering who you have become. That is why so many people smile on Instagram and bleed in the bathroom. That is why there are men who masturbate 3 times a day and feel like garbage afterward. That is why the woman who posts about freedom on her stories cries into her pillow when no one replies. That is why the motivational coach sticks positive notes on the mirror and takes anxiolytics in secret. That is why the world is on its knees before an invisible epidemic, the bankruptcy of pleasure as meaning. And no one is ready to hear this, because we have built an entire civilization on that lie. Alan Watts was not talking about cheap philosophy. He was trying to warn, if you follow pleasure as your compass, sooner or later, you will end up in hell. And this video is about that, about the price of desiring wrongly, about what happens when you look for what you do not understand, and about why pleasure, deep down, is just a disguise for death. The biggest trick you have been led to believe is that what you want is truly yours, and you have spent your entire life chasing desires that perhaps did not originate with you. Who taught you what success is? Who showed you what winning at life is? Who convinced you that pleasure is a sign that you are on the right track? These questions are not existential, they are urgent. Because you are trading years of your life for rewards, for answers you did not stop to question. And if you never thought about what you truly desire, then you are just a consequence of the propaganda you consumed. A conditioned reflex, an echo. Alan Watts does not soften. If you say that making money is the most important thing, you will spend your whole life wasting time. Only the problem is deeper than money. It is not about salary, it is about meaning. Watts goes further. He says that when you live only to keep life functioning, you are living to keep alive a thing you do not like to live. And that, to use his words, is stupidity. Existential stupidity. And how does this stupidity present itself? In a beautiful, fun, modern way. They call it purpose, but it is just fear. They call it stability, but it is a prison. They call it success, but it is just status with included burnout. The system did an excellent job. It programmed you to believe that pleasure is the goal of life. And so, you exist from Monday to Friday, waiting for a weekend to compensate for the hell with small doses of dopamine, alcohol, food, Netflix, a casual encounter that empties you more than it fills you. Then Monday begins, and you repeat, only with less energy, less soul, less of you. Behavioral psychology has a name for this: intermittent reinforcement. It is the same mechanism that makes rats addicted to levers, gamblers to slot machines, humans to social media. You are trained to wait for the next reward, even if it is worthless. You lose your freedom, but you do not notice. The truth that hurts, and that is why almost no one has the courage to say, is that you do not know what you want, because you never stopped long enough to think about it, without wanting to please anyone. Neither your parents, nor your feed, nor your own ego. Watts proposes a brutal question. What would you do if money did not matter? If you did not have to prove anything to anyone? If time was not an enemy? If you had full permission to live your life? How would you live? Few have the answer, and those who do lack the courage. And there is the knot. You spend your life desiring things you thought you wanted, but you do not want. You are just afraid of being without them. And that is not wanting. That is panic, disguised as ambition. Deep down, you do not want to be rich. You want security. You do not want applause. You want to feel valid. You do not want pleasure. You want to stop suffering. But no one taught you to admit that. They taught you to consume faster, to cover the hole without looking at it. And the worst part? It works for a while, until the pleasure fails, until the dopamine runs out, until you realize that what you thought you wanted no longer gives you anything. At that point, you either break or you wake up. The tragedy never begins with pain. It begins with too much pleasure. Everything consumed to the limit turns into poison, even love, even joy. And that is exactly why the Romans, after conquering the world, began to entertain themselves with suffering. They had everything: gold, slaves, art, wine, power, and it was not enough. Then came the spectacles, came the orgies, came the lions eating live people in packed arenas. And there, in that Colosseum overflowing with screams and blood, it became clear what Alan Watts tried to explain centuries later. When you take pleasure to the limit, what starts to excite you is pain. And you think, this is far away. Then look around you. People addicted to hardcore pornography because the normal no longer generates stimulus. People changing their faces with filters to see if they finally accept themselves. Children with adult anxiety, pill to sleep, pill to wake up, pill to endure. The paradise of consumption became the cradle of depression because when pleasure is trivialized, only the extreme still causes something. And the extreme almost always hurts. Dopamine, that neurotransmitter that makes you feel too good to be true, works like easy credit. The more you spend, the harder it is to get. You do not return to the same pleasure. You return to the same hole, but deeper. Science has a name for this: reward system, dysregulation. What gave you pleasure now gives you dependence. And what gave you joy now charges an invisible price. Your peace, your clarity, your freedom. Alan Watts called this Naraka, the world of hell in Buddhist cosmology, not as a spiritualistic metaphor, but as a psychological diagnosis. Naraka is the final stage of those who live only for pleasure, where all that remains is suffering, chosen as if it were freedom. That is why rich and famous people commit suicide, because what kills is not failure. It is realizing that success did not solve anything. You tried everything they promised you. You bought, ate, did, posted, had sex, and then you stayed there, with that indigestible silence between pleasure and the next pleasure. In the pause, where the truth escapes. Because if pleasure is all you have, then pleasure becomes all you lose. And in this game, you have already lost. Everything you try to control controls you. That is the most humiliating irony of the human condition. The more you try to dominate life, the more it swallows you, like quicksand. What we call freedom today is just control disguised. You want to control your body, your time, your future, your image, your reputation, your algorithm, your sexual performance, your productivity, your happiness. But you never question why you want to control everything, and much less if that is possible. Alan Watts does not joke with this idea. When you have control, what will you do with it? You never stop to think about what you would do if the world obeyed your every wish. Because if you thought about it, truly, you would realize that this is the worst possible nightmare. A universe without chaos is a universe without surprise. And a universe without surprise is a dead universe. The paradise where everything works is just a sterile past with artificial lighting. This is where Western logic collapses, because it was all built on the delirium of power, foresight, optimization, the idea that the evolved human being is the one who dominates the world, even the inner world. But Alan Watts cuts the jugular of that thought with a phrase that dismantles the entire enlightened ego. A completely predictable future is already the past. You do not want control. You want trust. You want to be able to let go of the steering wheel and not fall into an abyss. You want not to have to hold on to everything, But since you were trained not to trust anything, not even yourself, all that is left is to try to pretend you have the reins. And that is where anxiety is born. Anxiety is the side effect of trying to be God in a human body. What the West calls responsibility is often just panic with a nice name. The leader who wants to control everything, the father who suffocates the child, the woman who needs to be sure of the other's love, the young man who projects the next 15 years of his life as if he were an existential Excel manager. It is not consciousness, it is desperation in a tie. And if you think controlling is a duty, an obligation, a sign of maturity, answer with brutal sincerity. What would you do with that control if you really had it? If life obeyed you, what would you ask for? Most people who seek power have no plan beyond continuing to command. It is power for power's sake, control for fear of not controlling. But life does not follow that logic. You do not even command your heart rate. Your liver works without your permission. Your sleep does not respect your clock. Your brain produces thoughts you did not even invite. So, where did that illusion that you should be in charge come from? This is trauma disguised as rationality. Watts explains, the urge to want to control everything is a desperate way to try to escape death. But it is precisely that urge that kills you inside. You do not live, you calculate, anticipate, protect. And everything that lives defensively dies, little by little. You do not want control, you want peace. But they convinced you that one only comes with the other. And it is not so. Peace only appears when you release the throne and accept that the world breathes with or without you. And at that moment, a new kind of freedom is born. Not the freedom to choose everything, but the freedom not to need to choose all the time. The freedom to simply be. You are trying to satisfy someone who does not exist. That is the silent collapse that no one taught you to name. You spend years, sometimes a lifetime, chasing something you call self. But every time it gets close, it changes, runs away, disguises itself. And all that remains is the raw feeling that something in you is never complete. Alan Watts takes this phenomenon with bare hands. You do not know what you want for two reasons. Either you already have it, or you never met yourself. It is a phrase that seems poetic, but it is a philosophical bomb, because it reveals a fact that your entire culture refuses to admit. You are a mystery to yourself, and the attempt to define that mystery is what destroys you. It is like trying to look at your own eyes without a mirror. You can try, but you will only see that with which you see, never what you truly are. In Western Cartesian logic, everything revolves around the subject as a stable, thinking, rational center. But Watts subverts everything with a simple analogy. Just as a knife cannot cut itself and fire cannot burn itself, the subject cannot know itself as an object. That is, you are the process, not the product. You are flow, not form. You are event, not identity. And this is not cheap mysticism. It is pure metaphysics. Because every time you try to capture yourself with words, with labels, with absolute truths, everything escapes. You can say, I am anxious, I am an artist, I am free. But the truth is, you are only being all of that, and that changes, and what does not change is what you can never see. That is the mistake of any construction based on desire. You desire based on a fixed idea of who you are, but that you is just a fiction you feed so as not to collapse. And the cruel irony, the more you try to be you, the further away you get from what is real. You begin to play an identity and, therefore, every decision you make is not out of freedom, it is out of coherence. Coherence with a character you did not choose, but which you need to uphold. Watts warns, this attachment to the self is the origin of suffering, because you do not suffer because of what happens, you suffer because of what it means to you. And the you is a carefully edited illusion. Eastern philosophy does not ask you to discover who you are. It invites you to see what remains when you stop looking. And what remains? Silence, space, presence. The mind struggles because it does not know how to operate without form, but something in you recognizes that void as truth. Not because it understands it, but because it feels it. And this is where the logic of desire explodes. How to desire something if you do not even know who desires? How to seek a meaning if the seeker is unreachable? There is no easy answer, just an invitation. Let go. You will never understand yourself, but you can stop betraying yourself. The attachment to control is the only thing that separates you from freedom. And if you do not let go, you will spend your whole life fighting an enemy that never existed. You armed yourself against life, created plans, goals, strategies, plans B and C. You built defenses, rituals, philosophies, mantras. You tried to predict everything so as not to feel, not to fall, not to die. But you died anyway. You died in the soul, in spontaneity, in the peace that never came, in the lightness that became a distant promise. And all because you did not understand one simple thing. What you want only happens when you stop wanting in the wrong way. Alan Watts said it in a way that disarms even the most rationalist. When you truly do not know what you want, you reach the state of absence of desire. And what he is saying here is revolutionary. It is not about surrendering. It is about stopping the forcing. Because what is at war is not the world, it is you against yourself. Every time you try to get there, you move away, because that there is a mirage manufactured by an ego that does not even exist. And when you let go, the energy returns. Every time you voluntarily abandon control, you access power. This is metaphysics and neuroscience at the same time. The mind in a state of struggle consumes energy, generates cortisol, sabotages the nervous system. The mind in a state of surrender releases dopamine, serotonin, alignment. It is not letting go. It is letting flow with precision. It is trusting the intelligence of life, not out of faith, but out of perception. Watts calls this union with the divine principle, not as a religious figure, but as a reconnection with the natural flow of existence. The Tao, the Wu Wei, the doing without forcing, the acting without acting, the letting be. And in that state, you are not passive. You are unbeatable, because you are not trying to prove anything, nor run away from anything, nor uphold anyone. You simply are, and that is enough. The modern world taught you that letting go of control is being weak, but there is nothing harder and more powerful than surrendering with consciousness. Letting go, knowing what you are doing. Without drama, without fear, without a script. True freedom is not being able to have everything. It is not needing anything more. And when you reach that point, when you stop fighting, searching, conquering, you do not become God. You realize that you never stopped being it. You have made it this far. You looked at every word, felt every idea. This already says a lot about you. Because this video is not entertainment. It is a knife. It is a mirror. And if you made it to the end, maybe you are ready to go deeper. You can also use the super thanks. This simple feature is a silent message. This transformed me, and I give it back to you. But look, just by watching, by sharing, by commenting sincerely, you are already helping more than you imagine. This channel is not made for everyone, but maybe it is made for you. We continue together. Comment on what you want addressed in future content. We need your opinion to keep growing the channel. I await you in the next video.